Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3.
The third Nightmare on Elm Street film, Dream Warriors, has Heather Langenkamp returning as Nancy Thompson to assemble a bunch of Dream Warriors, kids who are in a mental institute who battle Freddy Krueger in their dream with their dream powers. I feel like this is the Nightmare movie that everyone thinks of when they think of the series, because the first one's a classic, but this one has all the fun and games of people engaging with Freddy in their dreams and fighting him.
The Dream Warriors were collectively all pretty awesome.
And I played the role of Kincaid, the first black in Nightmare on Elm Street, to kick Freddy's ass. Kincaid represented the minorities, not just African Americans, but he represented the minorities all over the world. And he was a hero.
Well, let me see you come get a piece of me. Krueger, pussy!
Heather and Robert Englund was like big sister and big brother to all of us. She was a connecting dot to the Nightmare on Elm Street movies that was needed.
It's got so many standout special effects in it, and one of my favorites is the giant worm with Freddy's head, especially because that's when he first sees Nancy Thompson again.
Oh my God.
We had 3 units shooting. 2 were for the principal actors with 2 cameras. Chuck Russell, the director, would run back and forth between each set. The 3rd unit was specifically just for special effects. Kevin Yeager did Robert's makeup on the 2nd and the 3rd one. Rodney Eastman in Nightmare on Elm Street 3, he's stuck to a false bed with a false chest, and Bob Kurtzman and I had to rig all the letters to say, "Come and get him, bitch," and that took hours and hours and hours.
There was a lot of creative killings. My absolutely favorite scene was when Freddy put Jennifer's head through the television and said, "Welcome to prime time, bitch."
Welcome to prime time, bitch!
This is also the movie where the quippy, almost fun Freddy Krueger comes into his own.
What's wrong, Joey? Feeling tongue-tied?
The brilliance of a lot of it was Robert. You know, Robert really came up with a lot of those lines.
Robert Englund was the boogeyman. He was the mummy. He was Dracula. He was all of them because he could be in your dream. My favorite Kincaid line was,
"Let's go kick the motherfucker's ass all over Dreamland."
Yeah!
Wes Craven had his own style, and he made sure that an African American was the first to survive a horror film and return to a sequel.
Oh, shit, Kristen, not again!
He had a great influence on horror. Now we don't get killed.
I've always been kind of afraid of dolls. You know, I remember when I was a little kid, somebody brought a ventriloquist dummy to my house, you know, and took him out of a suitcase. And I was like out of that room in a second and a half. The thing I've discovered with dolls was, of all the movies that I've done, a lot of people consider it the scariest.
Dolls certainly was a poster before it was a movie.
The little female doll that's holding her own eyes. That's just wrong.
And we made sure that we shot that scene because of the poster.
I was not expecting to make that movie at all. I was working on From Beyond and had a meeting with Charlie Bannon. He said, "We'd like you to make another movie using the same set." And he tossed me a script for what was called The Doll originally by Ed Naha.
Stuart's idea was to do it all practically and to do regular nice dolls, not scary dolls. And he said, well, it's what they do that's scary.
You had literally hundreds of dolls coming to life in this movie, an army of dolls. It wasn't just one doll, it wasn't just like Chucky. That turned out to be a major undertaking. And we used just about every technique we could. We used puppets, we used mechanical dolls, and we got Dave Allen to do stop motion for the scenes where we couldn't get it done any other way. It ended up taking an extra year to make that movie. It came out after From Beyond because the effects were so difficult. Well, the big scene in Dolls is the one where the evil stepmother is killed by the dolls. That's the first time you really see the dolls in action. And that was, my wife, Carolyn, played that part. My own kids came to the set when I was working on that movie. The idea that I was taking their toys, their dolls, and turning them into killing machines did not sit well with them at all.
There's one scene in particular. The characters hear a rustling in the woods, and it's a teddy bear. It's kind of goofy. Teddy bear comes out of the woods, and the character's like, no, not that. Then the teddy bear transforms kind of into a real bear and devours them. Kind of sums up the appeal of what that movie is.
Dead 2.
Evil Dead 2 was a blast from the minute that we landed in North Carolina to the minute that we left. Working with Sam Raimi was just a complete experience that I'll never forget. He was so imaginative, so funny. So much of what he loves and what he does is based on the comedy. If you look at the original Evil Dead, it's pretty terrifying. I think when we did Evil Dead 2, a lot of us were assuming it was going to be as relentless as the first movie. Just a lot better special effects makeup, and Sam was much more seasoned director at that point.
He was really specific, which helped me a lot, because there was no doubt in my mind what I had to do for each shot. He had the whole script planned out to a T.
I remember we got the draft of the script. There was a rewrite, and it's the scene where Linda's head's in the vise in the tool shed. And the door flies open, and Linda's headless corpse comes in with the chainsaw over its head. And I was like, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever read. Because we shot that early in the schedule, I really hadn't at that point really understood Sam's sense of humor. The fact that every time blood would spray, it wasn't like, you would never use just a little syringe of blood. You would use a fire extinguisher.
I had a couple of big trucks outside the stage with hundreds and hundreds of gallons of colored liquid. Let her rip, boys! It must have been thousands of gallons, and Bruce was down there. There was no dummy, there was no stuntman. Very physical role. Bruce Campbell was game for damn near anything. In fact, we're shooting the scene where he's smashing himself with the plates, and he ends up by flipping himself completely. And that was all him, that was not a stunt person. He was up for anything, and he did his own makeup for the cuts and all that he wore through most of the movie. That was his own makeup.
The first one, he was just kind of this hapless guy, just trying to survive any way he could. And then he became this very active and also snarky hero in Evil Dead 2 and then Army of Darkness later on.
I guess with Ash, we just get the sense that he's having a really bad day. You don't feel like he's going to be scarred for life because of what's going on. Even losing his hand, his reaction is just like, oh, you bastards.
You bastards.
Everything in Evil Dead 2 is a very quotable moment, from groovy to who's laughing now, and he's chopping off his hand with the chainsaw. We were such nerds in high school. I mean, we would quote that movie till our faces turned blue, and no one knew what the hell we were talking about.
When the hand comes off, then it's running around and flipping him the bird, and then I think it was the moment where he puts it under the bucket and puts a farewell to arms on top of it. That's when I got what Raimi was going for, and that's also kind of a perfect moment in horror comedy history.
Is your new home?
Oh, we got to shoot the evil hand doing this today. Oh my God, which one do we use? We had a radio-controlled hand, we had stunt hands, a hand that would come up, palm up on the floor where it had a prosthetic stump glued to a guy underneath. We had a palm down version with the same thing, another stump coming out so the hand could move accordingly.
I don't think you've ever seen anything before that handled that kind of bridge of comedy and horror so well. Raimi was the first person who, I think with legitimate genius, blended those things together. It ushered in a completely new genre. That was when a lot of us perked up and went, oh, this is a masterpiece.
It's Alive, Part 3, Island of the Alive. Don't see it alone.
Rick Baker had been working with me ever since I started making films. So naturally, when it came time to do the monster for It's Alive, I would give the job to him. We didn't show it much. I figured the more we showed it, the less scary it would be. And the more it was in your imagination. I wanted to make Return to the House of Wax, and Warner Brothers said, we can't give you that title, but if you want to make another It's Alive movie, you can. We had a lot of adventures on the picture. Michael Moriarty was yelling into the bushes to the monster, come on out, don't be afraid, come on out. And at that moment, a wild boar ran out of the bushes right at him, right into the camera crew, everybody running for their fucking lives. And I'm yelling to the cameraman, shoot it, get it on camera, get it. But they didn't get it, so what the hell. The monster was supposed to come up from a pond. So he put the guy in the rubber suit into the pond. On action, he's submerged, and he's supposed to count for 10 and come up. So we're waiting a minute and a half, and the monster has not yet come up. One of the actors runs into the pool and dives in and pulls him out. His suit had filled up with water, and he couldn't come up, so he would have drowned. So he was rescued right on camera. Daniel Pearl, the cinematographer, and his crew had this running joke of hiding a rubber chicken in the scene. I had to be on the lookout every day for a rubber chicken before we started rolling. One day I missed it, and the chicken showed up in the movie.
My God, some divers must have visited this island.
And recently, this stuff is brand new.
And that's what I like on the set, is having a good time. I want everybody to have fun.
And with Lost Boys, it was almost impossible to see it working because it was such a bold and almost audacious gambit, which is, let's take all of these standard rules of vampire lore and let's like squeeze them through almost like a big gaudy 80s teen sex drama, right? And I was like, God, if that doesn't work, that's like going to not work in spades. It was Joel Schumacher and Richard Donner. Donner was producing it. I think we were lucky in the end that we got somebody who had like such an ironclad vision for how to actually make that work. He wanted the horror. What Joel did was he took those tropes and he's like bridging the cinema of Nick Ray and 80s horror, and he's gonna pull all of this stuff together. The vampires represent the dark side of the other characters' psyches. Take all of the anxieties of being a teenager, coming into your own as an adolescent and your sexuality, isolation of being the loner in a new town. I would argue an undercurrent of the AIDS epidemic and just some of the phobias that were afflicting the country at that time, you know, the gay community and other communities. And then the sort of garishness of the 80s culture itself. He's commenting on the garishness. He's not just showing you the garishness.
With Lost Boys, you have sort of the perfect storm of horror meets rock and roll. They were vampires that women wanted to be with, guys wanted to hang out with, everybody wanted to be with the Lost Boys. What I think is really great about a lot of the stories in the 80s is there was a lot of stories about single parents. And there was a lot that I really enjoyed about Diane Wiest in Lost Boys in terms of the struggles she was facing raising Sam and Michael, played by Corey Haim and Jason Patric. There was something very realistic about the struggles she was facing in this very sort of fantasy world of vampires.
I have more serious things in my mind than girls in school. There's things I'm dealing with that you can...
Things I wouldn't understand.
To play this character who doesn't really say much, he's just this kind of teen, probably a runaway, probably had a really fucked up background, and then just gets to eviscerate people, sort of like gets to expunge all of his own anxieties, like, in these monstrous ways. It was really satisfying. We shot nights for a lot of our shoot. We were vampires. We would go to bed in the morning and get up at night, and we had blankets taped over our windows, and we were sort of treated like rock stars by the town. So we got up to a lot of trouble.
You have somebody like V. Neal who comes in to do these vampires with the assistance of Greg Canham and Steve Laporte. They're all dressed up like glam rockers intentionally because she wanted to sort of emote that 70s rock coolness of like Led Zeppelin. But she was like, well, if they're going to explode and do these cool things, like, I want glitter in there. So if you go and look at them, they're glittery vampires.
We had a full body cast of me that had like the blood pumping through it. If you actually watch the shot of Corey staking me, you can see the division of where it's going to retract. Pre-CGI days, now they would just clean it up in 3 seconds. And then Corey staked me, and then they dropped the body double, the rubber dummy, and then I landed in the dirt, and then all of the kids proceeded to kick so much dirt into my face that I went to the hospital with a scratched cornea. So it was, my screaming is real.
You did me!
I like to tell Corey Feldman whenever I see him that thank you for sending me to the hospital. Being on the set, sort of just goofing off with the other guys was a really good memory.
The old cliche and the old kind of warning is don't work with kids, don't work with animals, and don't work with special effects. And Monster Squad, that's all it is. You're having this kind of swell of these slashers and villains and dream monsters and guys in hockey masks, which is awesome. But then I think there's that question. It's like, how did we get here? Where are the origin stories? Where are the original monsters? Fred Decker, what he did was take the original monsters that launched this whole thing. Let's bring those back and pay a little tribute to those.
Characters who are meant to be Dracula, Frankenstein, the creature from the Black Lagoon. They managed to skirt the universal copyright through some clever dodges.
I actually think that improved them because you weren't recreating something. Tom Woodruff Jr. was working with Stan Winston's shop at the time, and he actually designed the Frankenstein applications redesign.
Here are Stan Winston and actor Tom Noonan, and Tom is being made up to play the Frankenstein's monster.
My favorite man in a monster suit always was, still is, the creature from the Black Lagoon. I wanted to be the guy in the monster suit, and Stan gave me my first role when I played the Gill Man in Monster Squad. Somebody else in the shop said, well, have you worked out your walk yet? And I'm thinking, uh-oh. Not only is there a walk to figure out, apparently, but I haven't learned it. And I'm thinking, and I could feel my confidence now starting. I'm thinking, what did I do? I said, I don't even know the terms.
It's a fascinating design, done unlike any other creature design suit and build and actual application of it than anybody had ever done at the time. And then now Tom's zipped up and glued into this one-piece suit and has to figure out how to be this character.
We're on the back lot at Warner Brothers and climbing out of the fake manhole cover and going through a fight with some very enthusiastic stuntmen with hard rubber clubs. And then having to move in on the store with Horace stuck out front with his shotgun, and that's when I finally thought, now it's time for my walk. It was sort of like a Monster Effects buffet. I got to sample everything, some stunts here and some squibbing and falling and my walking and breathing, all that stuff. And I got to die on screen. I don't think I will ever be able to relive those glory days because it was pretty high up.
Monster Squad has a lot of memorable one-liners. Other people have great lines. You're like, oh, I wish I had that line. But obviously, Wolfman's Got Nards is the line from that movie.
Wolfman's got nards! Come on! Come on!
The problem with Monster Squad, I think, was a couple things. The subject matter and the story and the action and the kind of monsters were a little too much for the 8, 9, and 10-year-olds. And it was too kid-like for the 15, 16, 17-year-olds that went to see The Lost Boys and dug that. So like, I'm not going to go see a kid's movie. So really what you left a small sliver of an audience in there that couldn't go because of the rating or their parents wouldn't take them. So they got left out twice. But we kind of made the first tween movie.
Hellraiser, a film by Clive Barker.
Hellraiser was written and directed by Clive Barker, adapted from his own novella, The Hellbound Heart. Central to a lot of Clive Barker's work is the idea of the monsters being the good guys, or at least being more complicated than simply being the bad guys. Pinhead is not the monster in the film. The monsters in Hellraiser are Julia, and Frank. The humans are the ones causing the trouble. I increasingly saw Pinhead as an impartial judge. As far as Clive was concerned, he was not to be the focus of the film. Clive's focus was all on Julia. For Clive, Hellraiser was about creating the first great female horror monster. I feel as though there's an element throughout the 1980s of people being given a chance. Clive had never directed a film, so I knew absolutely where his imagination was, but it is true that he arrived on set on day one on Hellraiser and said, "So who's in charge here?" He was extremely lucky, I think, in having Robin Vigeon by his side as director of photography, who's no small part of the success of Hellraiser. He worked with Clive and met Clive's imaginative vision head on. I was blessed with a lot of wonderful lines.
We have such sights to show you.
There was one line that I highlighted and I wrote next to it, laugh. And people ought to laugh, but they ought to laugh slightly uncomfortably, because as well as being a joke, it's a threat. And that line was "No tears, please."
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
I've always said that Pinhead is a horror monster who would be perfectly at home at a garden party with Noel Coward and Oscar Wilde, trading epithets.
Catherine Bigelow is probably one of my favorite filmmakers. Particularly her work on Near Dark is incredible. And I'd never seen a vampire movie like that. She leans into sort of this Western style. There's a coolness to it.
It's a bunch of vampires that are traveling across the country, and they bring in this new kid into their fold. It's so different because it really messes with vampire lore, and you've got an incredible cast with it. You've got Lance Henriksen, you've got Bill Paxton. It's so well done.
For as much as I'd grown up sort of trusting somebody like Lance Henriksen, seeing him transformed into this creature with no set of morals, like he is just out to eat and to exist and to survive, was something else.
The vampires take over this bar, and they're just slaughtering everybody and laughing.
Finger licking good.
Normally it's, vampire comes in, bites somebody, and this it's like, no, they're reveling in it, that they're murdering people.
To see Bill Paxton becoming this sort of unhinged crazy man of a character was so awesome. It's just such an interesting and different take on vampires than anything we saw during the 80s.
Horror goes directly to our primal nerve centers and the things that are most basic about being human. And that's fucking and killing.
You get sex and nudity on screen, and it's just as much of a hook as the violence was.
Nudity has never seemed that gratuitous to me in horror films. It's always seemed part of it. I mean, if you look at the old movies from like the 60s and early 70s in Spain and Italy, I used to show them on my show, Movie Macabre, and we'd have to cut out 3/4 of the movie because everybody was naked. I guess vampires and witches just run around naked all the time. I don't know.
It's interesting to me how society during the 80s sort of projected their own, especially U.S. cultures, projected their own hang-ups on nudity onto this genre of films when it really wasn't, I don't think, that much of an issue.
Oh, I think I'll take a shower now. It's hot in here. I mean, it's just out there with it. And I think it was completely gratuitous, and I think it was used only to sell the movie, and I think it was completely unnecessary. But you have to get young guys in there to see the movie, and how are you going to do that?
They asked a lot of girls to be naked in these films, myself included. But at that time, it was a little bit more forbidden and felt more base. And a lot of men were writing the movies. And so they were writing what they wanted to see. And yeah, they wanted to see naked ladies. For me, it sort of felt like, oh, here it is again. Okay. And it felt like it was a rite of passage. Okay. If I keep saying no to these roles, I'm not going to be able to work. So I said yes. And it was fine as long as the script was good. A lot of women were exploited for exploitation purposes, just to see it, because they would say yes.
The nudity helped get the butts in the seats. Like if I had 2 videos in my hand and one said nudity, one did not, which one you think I'm watching, I do think they need to have more male nudity. Even way back, I was like, I never see a penis ever in a movie. And even now, it's still rare, although getting a little better. But I feel like if you have a naked lady, throw in a naked man. Quality.
Halloween 3, I think you see my ass. I had an ass then. I don't have an ass anymore. I'm too old. It's all gone away.
I don't know why an audience of teenagers would think that oversexed teenagers deserve to die, but that's what was happening in the 80s. So we must have had a lot of undersexed teenagers enjoying the death of oversexed teenagers in these movies.
America has always been very schizophrenic in that it's it's a puritanical place, and so in a lot of the movies, if you had sex, you would die. That was kind of the Friday the 13th model. Anyone that would have sex was you knew was going to be dead by reel 3.
I think a lot of people were trying to equate sex with sinning, and you're gonna go frolic and you get what you get. It's kind of like how in Scream they talk about the rules. You had sex, now you're gonna die.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. No! Big no-no! Big no!
Maybe not the healthiest message to send out to people.
It's a kind of old-fashioned, isn't it? I mean, especially after the freedom and outrageous goings-on of the 60s and 70s.
And that was so ingrained that it was a rule that they deliberately had to start breaking. And reviewers pointed out they had sex and they lived. That's how strong that was.
I like that women have sexual power over men a lot of the time in horror. No matter how the male antagonist or the villain may try to subjugate and victimize the woman, she has always been able to very proactively and aggressively act on her own behalf and get her revenge on the bad guy. That works for me.
So there's different kinds of nudity in horror. There's plenty where it's used for shock value, I guess. Lots of violence is happening on top of it, and you're really confused because if you're getting aroused as this is going, it's like, am I a terrible person as maniacs slaughtering people? At what point are you allowed to enjoy it, and what point is it kind of disturbing?